So first you want to crack all of the wheel nuts one by one, and you'll need a 21mm socket, a 16mm socket, and your locking wheel nut. Next you'll want to find a strong point to jack the car up, like the jacking point on the sill. If you want, you could also lift from the chassis underneath, which are the depressed bits highlighted in blue, but don't jack from the red bits. You could put a hole in your floor. As a note, you can also lift the rear end up from these black parts here, which are also part of the chassis, but right now we're doing the front brakes, so we don't need to. This is just a note in case you ever need to jack it up from the rear in future. Once you've lifted the car with the jack, you should put an axle stand next to it. This is basically your insurance policy in case the jack fails, so that your car doesn't come crashing down, just like my hopes and dreams of being a real mechanic. You'll also want to chuck off the back wheel to stop the car from rolling away, because it can probably remember who you are and how you drive, and let's face it, we know it's going to try at some point. Lift the bonnet or hood and remove the brake fluid cap. Yes, I know mine's way too full, I fixed this after recording the video. Now you can remove the 4 wheel nuts with the same sockets as before, as well as your locking wheel nut. Make sure you keep your locking wheel nut to one side so you don't lose a piece. And now you can remove the entire wheel. Turn on the ignition but don't start the engine, and then turn your wheel so that the brake caliper becomes a bit easier to access. I'm using a small HW3 hex bit with a small extension rod to help me get the pins out, but you can use whatever works for you. There are 2 pins, one upper and one lower, that hold the brake pads in place. Just lightly tap it with a hammer to get the pins loose. Do the same for the bottom. I used a small old screwdriver to get the pins a little bit further out, just so I could grab them. Now you can hold the brake pad retention clip down and just wiggle the top pin out of the caliper and keep it to one side. Do the same for the bottom. Again, I used a screwdriver to give it a little push just so I could grab hold of it to pull it out. You'll want to keep the retaining clip to one side as well. We'll need all of these later. Now you can just use the old pads to press the pistons in a little so that you've got some room to move around, and then pull out the old brake pads from the caliper. Remove the shim plate and place it down, and now you can remove the old pads and see that it looks more worn out than a Reddit repost. Do the same for the other side as well. Shim out, and then the brake pad too. To push the pistons back in, I like to use these top notches on the old pads like a lever. Do the same on the other side as well. Now you can take your new brake pads. I'll leave some details in the description as to part numbers and where to get them from, etc., since I found some websites will tell you that they have parts that fit your vehicle, when in reality they're completely inept and have absolutely no clue what they're talking about. You can see how much brake pads should be on here, and that my new ones don't have an acoustic wear indicator. For me, this is fine since I check them regularly, but if you want you can pay a little extra for the wear indicator, which will make a screeching noise when the brake pads become worn down and need to be changed. Take the shim plates and put it back onto the back of the brake pad, and then just slide them in like so. Sometimes this can take a little effort, so I kinda skipped it. Now take the pad retention pins and slide them back into the caliper. If they don't go through the shim plate and the brake pad holes, you need to adjust them. You can give them a tap with a small hammer to help them back in. You'll need to hold the retaining clip in place as well and press it down to push in the final pins. This should be straightforward, but can take a little time, so take it easy and get it right. They're a lot tougher to buy than you think. Next you can take the hex bit we were using earlier and just lightly tap the pins back into place. You'll know when it's in place because the top of the pin will be flush with the caliper. From the front, it should look something a little bit like this. Now you can turn the steering wheel to center again, and then just put the wheel back on. Put the wheel nuts back in place and tighten them down pretty good. They don't have to be perfect, just snug enough to hold the wheel on. You can go ahead and remove the axle stand and then let the car down and remove the jack. Now take a breaker bar or a torque wrench and tighten the wheel nuts down to about hand tight. Don't overdo it though, you don't want to strip the bolts. Put the brake fluid cap back on and you're good to go. Remember you'll need to pump the brakes before you go for a drive so that the new pads are pushed nicely up against the brake discs and there's pressure in the brake lines. If you don't, they won't work first time when you press them while driving, and that's not very safe. Now just remove the wheel chocks and go write the car off during the first test drive.